You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks and Zach Bechtold. We hope you enjoy this week's show, and you can find out more about us by going online at beardedtheologians.com, where you can pick up a few t-shirts, listen to a few old episodes, and find ways that you can connect with us. Thank you for listening. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this week, we are kicking off the season of Advent. And it just so happens this was not something we planned out. This was not something I will say it's more divinely inspired more than anything. Is that Zach and I coincidentally picked the same sermon series material and theme from entitled From Generation to Generation. And so Zach and I figured we would tie this into what we talk about on the Sunday before to keep the theme. And so, Zach, as you thought about or wrote or whatever, this last week was on hope. And so, Zach, as you think about that, set it up for us.
Yeah. The whole idea behind this sermon series and why it captured my attention for my church is we've spent the last year celebrating our 160th anniversary as a church and as a part of our community here in Bozeman. And thought it would be fitting, one, to end the calendar year, but to start the Christian year with keeping that going. And so this idea of generation to generation, this series really, really captured that. And how are we as a church and as a people leaning on the people who have come before us, the people who are with us, and continuing to add to the foundations of our faith in our communities for the people who come after us, and giving voice to all of that through the Advent story, I think was really, really fun for me. And so this last week, this first Sunday of Advent, like Matt said, traditionally starts with hope. And for me, I took this series in the direction to find hope in the title of There's Room for Every Story. And the scripture reading that I went with for last Sunday was Matthew 1 through 17, which, if you know your Gospel of Matthew off the top of your head, that is the genealogy of Jesus, which is a boring scripture to read in the middle of your worship service, but also lots of fun if you have the right person read it like I did, who was willing to play with the names and to just go for it. And Betty, if you're listening to this, I don't think you ever listened. You did a fabulous job. And but this idea that through Jesus's genealogy that goes back 42 generations, which I can't go back more than maybe 4 off the top of my head of my own family. But we go back from Jesus all the way to Abraham, which is a long ways, and Matthew's really intentional about it. And beyond all that, what we find, or what I found through just digging through the genealogy, is everybody that's listed, and really those that aren't, have a story that build upon getting us to Jesus. They are the building blocks through the Hebrew Bible that get us to this point of the Messiah. And there's a lot of people in there, like King David. We know King David's story. Good, bad, right, or wrong. We know it. We know a little bit about Abraham. We may know, Isaac and Jacob and maybe even Esther and Rahab, right? We know those folks. But of the 42 names that are listed, at least a third of them, my people after church were like, yeah, I've never heard those names. I don't know those people. I don't know those stories. Which, for me, I ask the question or make the argument of, even outside of this sermon, we all have a story to tell. Each and every one of us has a story. And I promise those of you who are listening and going, well, I don't have a story. And if I do, it's boring. Nobody wants to hear it. Nobody needs to hear it. And that's my argument, is we're wrong when we say that, right? Somebody out there needs to hear our story about where and how God has shown up in our life. And it may not be memorable for us or for most people, but there's someone out there who it will be life changing for, who's going through the same thing that you're going through. And I think back to all of these names listed in Matthew's gospel in the same way of, yeah, there's some we don't remember, but when we read their stories, we get to go, oh, that's where God is. That's where God shows up. And when we read them at different times in our life, different, they make different impacts, right? And so that's kind of where I went from there, and leaning into the hope that we have a story to tell and we have stories to hear. There are people in our lives whom we need to hear their stories because it rhymes with our own, or it's exactly what we're going through, or it's what we've been through, and we need to know that we're not alone. And I find great hope in that. I find great hope in this whole idea of a genealogy that goes back 42 some odd generations that is boring on paper, but holds so much hope within it, because without it, the story of Jesus isn't the same, right? And so finding hope in those unexpected moments that we may or may not see in the minute, right, when they're happening. So just making room for that is where I went with this, and consequently making room for hope. You're muted.
Yeah, that's great. We did this. So we did the Hanging of the Greens service as part of it, with
Playing from
incorporating
Zach's
the
background.
idea of hope. We didn't read the genealogy. I used the Isaiah scripture that was provided, of kind of a grounding of hope of what is to come, like what the hope is. There'll be no more war. There'll be peace. And what does peace look like? We wrestled with that in the group that I lead after worship. Um, and I found like we intertwined a lot of the stuff from the liturgical part of hope into um the telling of how we view hanging of the greens, and how this comes from this was something that was passed on from generation to generation, talking about how even our chrismons are something that were passed down from generation to generation, only to be kind of restored a little bit a couple of years ago. And like really, I felt I left the service very hopeful of this season, probably more than I ever have, because it grounded me and reminding me that this is the season of preparation of Advent that we're in needs a lot of hope, and that it's grounded in those that have gone before us, that if they've made it through, we can too. And I loved the guided meditation that we put together to kind of help people ground themselves in hope, that this is something that we can learn from the previous generations, but it's also something, as we look forward to make room for this season, to make room for the baby. It was really cool. We had someone read the room poem, and it was just powerful. We ended the service with that. It was just so powerful. It just, I don't know, the whole service itself was just amazing. It was great, but it also, I left more hopeful for Advent this year than I think I ever have before. I was excited, like it just all the feels, but I left with a lot of hope and a lot of feeling of hope that I haven't had in a long time. But just it was just a great experience.
And I think that's the thing, right? Like that, these practices help us do and lean into what is hopeful right now, right? Like we have a lot going on, just as people and around the world, and hope is so necessary to who we are, no matter what we're going through, um, because we need that bit to hold on to when things are hard, when things feel still, when life is just beating us down. Having a hope that we can come out of that is huge. And being able to do that in different ways, right? Like for you to be able to do your hanging of the greens and do it as an actual service, in Advent, rather than leading up to Advent, or like I do just after the service and I call it hanging of the greens, where really it's just all hands on deck to decorate the
Yeah.
church. Um, and it's just those little things, right? And it's like you said, it's all about passing it down. We don't have any of this, right? We don't have the Gospels. We don't have the Hebrew Bible. We don't have any of this if people didn't pass it down before us. Our faith in and of itself, we don't have if somebody didn't pass it down to us, right? There's somebody in our lives who modeled their faith in a way that passed it down to us that got us to this point. And there's still people in our lives who are doing that. And then we become those people. And I always want to be really clear in as we pass things down, it's not always that's not exclusive to people younger than us. It's not exclusive to the next generation. Passing things down means we share with everybody, right? People that could be older than us or our same age, our peers. We pass our faith, those moments where God shows up, those stories down in a way that brings hope, right? That hopefully shows where God is at work in their lives also. Um, and and I think that's what this series does well in the generation to generation. We're talking about how we do move our faith through the generations, but also how we interact in that and share that here and now currently, not just for this far off future hope that the church will continue, that our faith will continue, but that it's active and working here and now.
So here's a good question for you. How would Matthew's gospel change if it didn't have the genealogy in it?
Um, I
From
don't,
your point of view, I mean, I'm
yeah.
not saying this is like but yeah, how would you feel? Like, how would you feel that would shape the gospel?
I don't know that it does for me. I know that Matthew is writing to an exclusively or a very heavy Jewish context, and genealogy was so important to him. It's less important to me personally, but I found a renewed interest in what the genealogy does, not so much of how it traces Jesus back, but how it tells the story of how we get Jesus, right? And why that lineage and that genealogy becomes important in really the fullness of humanity and divinity in Christ. But um, I think without it, I don't know that it changes my opinion or my understanding of Jesus. But with it, it gives me a deeper calling to the stories that build up. Much like when we read through the rest of the Gospels, when we don't have a birth narrative or we don't have a particular parable or story or interaction with Jesus, I miss it, right? Like I miss those moments. It changes the Gospels a little bit. Um, but still tells the story. And so I can take it or leave it, truly. But also I have a newfound respect for it.
Well, I would see it as if because this was a lot of this was done through listening.
Hmm.
I could see this as the listener if you were listening to the story being told,
Yeah.
hearing those names, and
Hmm.
like you said, a lot of those you would have known, or you would have known of their story,
Hmm.
because the way that the Hebrew culture works is they continue to tell their stories from the
Yes.
past. Like, it's something I wish we would do that better as Christians, but that's a
Right.
whole other podcast for a whole other day. But I think there's, like you said, I'm a Mark guy, so like I don't need the birth
There's
story
no
doesn't
birth
even
narrative,
exist.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
There's just
and
Jesus
so
being Jesus.
yeah, Jesus does Jesus. But I love it because it seems like every year that I read through the genealogy, whenever it happens
Hmm.
during the season of Advent, I always catch something that I remember somebody that I didn't remember before.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like when you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table, or in our case, the Thanksgiving house, because we had like 30 people in the house. And so like it was all not my house, but my sister's house.
Hmm.
And you had all these people here, and we started remembering these people, remembering,
Hmm.
those people, or this person or that person, or you would tell a story about that person. And there's something special about that.
Hmm.
And then this time of year, we find ourselves telling those stories
Yeah.
of, maybe an uncle who's passed away. We tell the story
Hmm.
of their interaction with them during Christmas, or we have, friends, or story, like even in some cases, cultural stories. I was listening the other day to the Moravians bringing the Christmas story to the Cherokees, and
Hmm.
listening to how that came about. And I love that. It reminds me of my greater connection to humanity,
Hmm.
and there is a sense of hope that comes out of that. That I know that if their story continues, maybe mine will too. Maybe somewhere down the line, somebody will tell stories about me.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think that there's definitely some really cool things that we can do with that. I think it's important, but I also think that like it's not going to break the gospel if it's not there, if that makes
Right.
sense.
No, I don't think it does. And the point I drove home a little bit with my sermon on Sunday was exactly that. There's some people and stories in here that we forget, and often that feels like it rhymes with our own story or our understanding with our own story of nobody's going to remember me, nobody's going to remember my story, nobody wants to hear that, and yet it's a those aren't footnotes in Jesus's story. Those are bricks in the foundation of who Jesus is and how Jesus gets to this space. And without him, the story breaks down, right? Without him, you go back 13 generations instead of 42, or you go back 6 instead of 42, right? Like
Yeah.
so they're key in the story. And I think that for me, just like you, it reminds us that, oh, there are these stories out there, but it's also a reminder to us of even when my story feels like it's flat or boring or not important, it still matters. It's still worth telling. And you're right. We are not in a society and a culture of storytellers anymore. We haven't been
Mm-mm.
for a very, 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 very long time. It is not a new revelation. And I think we're missing something.
Oh, we're missing generations of stories of stuff that reasons why we do things. And and the preface, like how we did Hanging in the Greens, it wasn't like you do it where everybody kind of
Hmm.
decorate, everything's already decorated.
Right.
We just talk about the elements of
Right.
it because how often, I mean, you hopefully you remember your BC time.
Hmm.
You were um you were at this experience and you had no clue why they were doing what they were doing, or why this and why not have a Christmas tree decorated in front of the sanctuary with all sorts of fun ornaments.
Yeah.
Why have specific ornaments,
Hmm.
or different things like the greens, what do they represent, or
Hmm.
the holly, or the Advent candles. um that reminds me, in the Advent candles, um, I accidentally deleted the Advent blessing in the wreath blessing in it because do the
Mm.
blessing. So did the Chrismon tree blessing, and so we turned on the lights. Although nobody turned on the lights, it's a whole other deal for all the problem. And then when we did the Advent, we were going to roll into the Advent blessing, and then the candlelighters, were going to do the Advent candle lighting. I accidentally deleted that out of the script and like everything. So when I was putting together the worship service, I was like, wait a minute, we're not blessing the wreath this year. So I had to go back and find it. And so I put it in there, and so it worked out great. But I really have loved this idea of how um we are connected to those that go before us, and
Mhm.
that the generation to generation idea is to remind us that we didn't this just didn't come out of thin air. This wasn't something that us as pastors came up with last minute. There's a lot of history and tradition that was passed on. Maybe it was passed on from us, from pastor to pastor or whatever, but I don't know. I really left Sunday really excited and very hopeful, more so than I had in the past. And it was just it was a very hopeful time, and what a great time to deal with that then in that service. So yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I love that. This is a really fun series. If you're in either of our churches, we have a digital copy too. If you're not in either of our churches and you would like to follow along in the devotional with us, this Generations to Generations, let us know. We can get you a digital copy of it, and it's got some really cool art and poems and daily readings for the whole season of Advent. We can get that to you today. Just reach out to either of us and we'll get that moving along.
I know for those that frequent the Castle Rock First United Methodist Church, we have those sitting out in front as you walk in.
Mhm.
You heard me talk
Same in
about those
Bozeman.
last week.
Yeah.
But if you do want it digitally, we can definitely get it to you. Although I'd also, as you're there with us, we have all the art in a space, in a worshipful kind of meditative space that people can look at there as well. And so yeah, but listeners, thank you for listening. And so um, Zach, do you have anything else before we? Oh, I do have one. Where have you seen God at work since the
Oh,
last time we gathered on the
wow.
podcast?
Wow. Forgot to even ask the question. Um, Good night. That was a great question that I should be prepared for after 52 weeks this year. Um, hmm. I had a conversation yesterday with a church member who was just sharing, honestly, a bit of hope in where their story did exactly what we were talking about today. Just made space for somebody else who needed that space to process, to vent, to be angry, to just be human. And they called me yesterday afternoon and got my voicemail, and I could hear the excitement in their voice to share their story. And when we finally played phone tag a little bit and touched base, just just the just the opportunity to hear those stories about where God's showing up not only in my church people's life, but how they continue to show up and make space in ways that they didn't expect, and felt that presence of God, and just felt truly present in the moment, and the hope that they got from it. We don't get the I don't know, I don't get those phone calls very often where it's Pastor Zach, I got to tell you a story. And it was good. It made my day, and I hope I hope we make space for that as people, as clergy people and people. But yeah, I don't know. May it just be a reminder when you hear that excitement in somebody's voice, listen, you know, just sit and listen and see what happens. What about you?
For me, um, it was really cool. Um, I was sitting in worship on Sunday and was listening to the poem that was read through the curriculum. I think it's called Room or something like that. I can't remember what the name of the poem is. I don't have it in front of me right now. But I found myself overwhelmed, or not overwhelmed, but just being flooded with this feeling of making room for God during this season. Just like it's gonna happen. You're gonna be fine. It's gonna be okay. You're gonna make room. You're gonna make space. Like that. Just hearing that and just hearing the words, making room. And like there was just something about that was just really great. Like it just made me feel really great, and just uh, and how there is room. Like it just was powerful. So yeah. Um, Listeners, we are grateful for you. And so, as like Zach shared with you, if you want the Advent thing, reach out to us. We'll be glad to get that to you. We are thankful for you as well, our listeners, to just continue listening, continue sharing, continue to ask questions. And so you can connect with us at beardedtheologians.com or wherever you get your podcast. Or if you watch us on YouTube, you can do that as well. We're just grateful you do that. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Subscribe and like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.